Hey guys, good evening. We were gonna take a couple minutes and talk about what I was thinking in regards to some of these logs, and I wanted to show you guys what the thought process is in regards to how I'm milling it up and some of the things I need to take into consideration when I'm dropping the trees, choosing the trees, and how I'm figuring out what's going to come in each piece of each log that I'm going to mill up into various lumber. So I'm going to aim you towards my little drawings here, and then we'll go about doing it that way. So here, let me aim you over. So some of the things that we have to take into consideration is actually the width of the log itself. So if this is a cross section of a log, the diameter of it, the one on the left, each square would be 3 inches. And at one point I had somebody say something about if you want a 6x6 post, just get a 6-inch log. Well, that doesn't work so well, because if you've got a 6x6 post and you've only got a 6-inch log, then you're going to be missing the corner of it, and so you're not actually getting a square piece of lumber out of it. You're only getting a round piece. So you have to go for a bigger log in order to get the size of post you need. I'm using 6x6 because that's what I was milling up for my pole barn. So I've got a bunch of 6x6s that I've been doing, and so in order to do that with roughly 3 inches per square, you can see that it extends out, and we're looking at roughly an 8 or a 9-inch log in order to get the square inside of it, and then that will give me the 6x6, and then it cuts off the slabs off the side, and then I end up with the board I want. Or I could opt to do something else rather than a 6x6, because of, if you look at how the squares are laid out, I could actually do probably a 4x8, so a nice 4x8 beam. I could probably get the same thing out of that, and maybe a couple little smaller boards off to the side if I wanted to do that many cuts. So you can kind of see how you just rearrange the rectangles in that, or if you're doing something custom, you would have to figure that out. But so in that case, with like either a 6x6 or a 4x6 or 4x8, if that's what I was doing, a single beam, it would end up being 4 cuts, 1, 2, 3, 4, in order to get the beam out of there that I wanted. The tree that I dropped in the previous video, or after the previous video that I filmed, that I was talking about the dwarf mistletoe, I did the measurements on it, and it is actually about 18 inches across at its thickest part, and it tapers as it gets taller and taller and stuff like that. But so at 18 inches, if you look at the circle on the right, now the squares are going to each equal 4 inches. And so what I'm going to end up doing is I will mill the first piece. So I have to figure out the depths and the cut and all that kind of stuff, and then I'll mill it to where I'm basically cutting at the 12-inch mark, to where this is 12 inches across here. And then once I pull that slab off and I've got this flat surface, then I'll do the perpendicular cuts and basically cut those 2 sides off, leaving this huge beam 12 inches across and probably about 15 inches deep. At that point, then I'm going to pull out the other mill, and I'm going to just start cutting it in to 2-inch slabs. And I'm imagining that I'm probably going to get 5 or 6 slabs out of that one beam right there. It's not showing it on there. The consideration that you have to think about is like, if I need a 2-inch slab and I needed 6 of them, and this was only 12 inches deep right here, then I would have a problem, because every time you cut the blade, the chain on the chainsaw, is what's called a kerf cut, it cuts away materials. And so for most chainsaws, that's 3/8 of an inch. So every time you cut a slab, you're losing 3/8 of an inch. And that adds up real quick over time. That's almost a half an inch. So if I'm doing 5 cuts, 6 cuts, that's, almost 3 inches, almost 3 inches of material that disappears just because it's cutting. It's turning it into sawdust. And so you got to take those kerf cuts into consideration, how much material disappears, where the sawdust goes and stuff like that, and then start rearranging things. If I had other beams that I needed to do, I could potentially, you know, or other brace stock that I needed or something like that, I could do an extra cut here, that kind of a deal. And then, you know, just get creative with how you're doing it. The goal, though, is to make as few cuts as possible. The more efficient you can be with the cuts, the better it is. So, like if you're looking at this single 6x6 on the left picture, that would be 4 cuts for one board. But in this scenario, if I'm sticking with just these 2x12 slabs, I'm going to have 1 cut for the top, 1 for each of the sides, for 3 there, and then 1 for each of the slabs. So let's say I'm doing 5. So then I would have another cut for each one of those for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 cuts for 5 boards. So you can see the math there where you're ending up with a lot more efficiency in regards to what you're getting out of it and how much damage you're putting on the saw. Because it's, I mean, a chainsaw is great for doing certain things. It's not really designed for doing the milling stuff the way some people are improvising and making that happen. And this is just the simple end diagram that we're looking at. Another consideration is the shape of the log. And if you look at this little diagram right here, you can see that on your, this up here is a good indication of your standard tree. If this end is the trunk, and as it gets taller, the tree actually gets thinner. So if I were to do that type of measurement on the thick end of the board, and then started cutting, then you got to get rid of that extra piece of paper. Then it's gonna the taper is gonna cause it to disappear, and I'm not gonna actually have the board. So when you're doing the measurements and doing the blocking out on the circle, you actually have to, and then you start applying it to the timber itself. You got to do it from the narrow end, so that as you're cutting, yeah, you get a little bit thicker waste material, but you're actually getting what you think you're getting, as opposed to it tapering away and then you don't have the proper width or the proper length of a board. And so you can kind of see as you're looking at that one there, the tapering, and so you can lose quite a bit of material just to be even with that end right there. And so you're getting rid of all that material and still only even with the top of the board. So and then another consideration is when a board has some sort of sway or twist or just bend in it. And so when you're doing that, the dotted line in the middle is there to represent the center line based on the 2 ends. And you can see where this part here is narrower than that part there. And so when you're cutting this, the first cut, if I needed those slabs, if it were a perfectly straight board, I would probably only go down about that far. But since this is swayed, if I drew that line all the way out to here, I mean, it's almost up to the bark again, and then I don't have the proper board width that I need. So then I would have to calculate that in. I would maybe run a string line from end to end and then measure that distance right there, so that I knew that if I needed to go down 2 inches according to the end, but there was an added 2-inch sway or curve to it, then I would have to add another 2 inches in order to bring the cut line down to the appropriate depth. And then that creates a lot of waste, but it is what it is. Again, I may be able to go back and add that little corner piece in there or something like that, depending if I needed some other stock, but it gives you an idea that there's a fair amount of waste, and it's not just a straight, simple process. You got to take into account how big the circle is, what you think you can fit into the circle. You have to take into account the taper and going from the correct end, or at least accounting for the fact that there is a taper, and then is there any bow in there. A little bit later in the video, I'm gonna splice two things together, and I'll show you one of the logs I was looking at and some of the tapers that are, not the taper, but the curves and the bends that are involved in that. But so I'll transition to that and give you an actual practical experience for what I'm looking at. And then there's other considerations such as the shape of the tree itself. When you're looking at it, most trees have a certain amount of sway or bend or twist or anything to them. I mean, like when you look at that tree right up there, that deadish looking one, it's got a pretty obvious sway to it. So when you're picking the trees, you need to figure out which one you want and make sure that even just standing there is going to be correct. The one that I just dropped is actually, when you look at it from this angle, is really, really straight, but that's actually a little bit of an illusion. By switching the angle up a little bit, you start to see up there at the far end that towards the trunk, there's a bit of a sway off to the right way up there, and that's actually about 5 feet of the base there. So a fairly thick portion of the tree there has some sway in it, and then so that's going to have to be cut off depending on what you want to do with the tree. And then taking a step back and looking at the tree, there's just, let me see if I can get this in the right angle, get more tree in here. There's just a wee bit of a sway going from down there all the way down here. And then now the question is that sway actually part of the tree, or is it because it's laying on that hill and not being supported in the middle? I'm not sure. I'm going to have to figure that one out. But it's kind of irrelevant to me anyways, because I'm not making a 50-foot span of anything. I'm just going to be making some lumber, some planks. So I'm going to be cutting that into probably a 10-foot, maybe 12-foot section, and then planking it down from there. So that long sway really isn't that big of a deal to me. It's even a little bit more noticeable looking at it from that direction. You can see it even a little bit more. So, and then also, if you look at it from this direction, you can see there's actually a little bit of sideways sway going on there off probably about halfway up the log from where it's standing right now. So hopefully between the division of the circle that we talked about earlier and then also the sway of the tree, I won't lose much lumber in regards to creating what I need. Fortunately, what I need is at a minimum 5 planks, and that's what I'm aiming for. So the base of this log, this portion right up here, even after chopping off that 5-foot trunk, should give me 2 or 3 planks per 12-foot section. And then maybe I can probably get some brace stock out of it, some 3x6 stuff. We'll see. I'm going to have to play with it and do my little circle diagram. But anyways, that is basically what we're going to do. And I'm going to spend the rest of the afternoon setting these logs up. I don't think I'm going to mill it. I think I need to go down and get some fuel oil, and in order to have it running, sharpen up my chains, be ready to rip roar in the morning, and then hopefully I'll have my planks and stuff set up. But hope you enjoyed.